So I got part way in, and I just like just stopped it. And I was
Never
like,
mind.
maybe I could go back to it. Yeah. When I'm another mental space, I could go back to it and listen to it fully, Maybe I could just listen to more of what you're saying and less of what I'm saying.
What you're saying is the whole point. That's the best
Yeah,
part.
I know. I know. This is like the moron about it.
Oh, dude, like being able to see yourself on camera or whatever, like to be able to watch yourself is like a whole nother level um,
Yeah.
of like radical self-acceptance, like
Yeah.
that's really the skill that we're talking about. Is it hurts to see your own imperfections, and like if I was truly conscious in the moment, I would have done it this way. Like
Yeah.
I interrupted. I mean, those are the things that I usually beat up on myself for, is like, you weren't listening good enough. You didn't ask enough questions. Like, they're going to think you don't even like them. Like, it's these kinds of things where, like, oh man, we can beat up on ourselves for all kinds of reasons. And when you watch back through a tape of yourself, it's like fair game, open season on like,
Yeah.
yeah, how much self-criticism do you normally engage in? And if it's a lot, it can be really painful to see yourself like
Yeah.
making videos and stuff like that, which I totally get, but I feel like it's kind of a spiritual process of when you're ready, like in the right headspace to receive it, like that would be an amazing meditation, I would imagine, to like watch like really what is it? Why is it so hard to watch yourself, Because that's the whole reason we're recording this, is because I love hearing what you're saying. So like it's good stuff. And yet I totally get it. Like there are times where I'll lose my train of thought, and almost always it's because I'm being self-critical in the moment, and it cuts off
Yeah.
my ability to continue talking. But even in those moments, when you watch back through the recording, you're making sense. You're tracking. Like, and then you start thinking like, I don't know what I was saying. And then you
Yeah.
stop and you're like, I don't even think this makes sense. And you're like, no, it did. It made
Yeah.
perfect
That's
sense. The self-doubt shut it down in a second though. Dude,
what reminds me of whenever I first saw you, whenever you doing some of your videos, and the first time that I actually, tuned in, and like you were kind of speaking to this very idea about when you're listening to yourself and you're doing the videos. And at the time I'm thinking, well, I don't know what she's talking about, because it seems like she's doing just fine, but then putting myself on the other side and then hearing my own self, and I said, oh, now this makes sense
there you
as to
go.
what she's talking about, that critical doubt, all that stuff that you go into when you're doing these things. And it gave me some more context as in terms of how you're feeling
Oh,
whenever you're putting these things together, and because I'm thinking to myself, am I speaking clear enough? Am I sounding, like I'm, at least have some sort of idea of what I'm talking about? Or am I just searching for thoughts and ramblings ons and stuff like that? And then this is just kind of like, well, I'm not this professional person who has this degree of background in this, to show up in this way. And so there's all these other criticism that goes on that's not really me, you know, but it's from things that I've, accumulated from hearing everybody else's perspectives on this type stuff. So just trying to get down to the bare minimum and be like, you know what, like you said, I'm just going to do it, present myself in the way that I'm presenting it, and just go with it, and as time goes on, I'll find a level of comfort. It was like, okay, I'm doing all right.
yeah. It brings it all to the surface. Like every tape that's like already playing, like it just brings it to the surface where it's in your face. Literally, you're watching the video of yourself, like face to face
Yeah.
with yourself. And so that's where one of the realizations that I'm having is I tend to be very sensitive to people's feedback about you know, the difficulties that I have sometimes with this creative world of like making content, putting my heart out there, and then, you know, getting feedback about it. And one of the pieces that's like clicking into place is that most people like just don't know, you know,
Yeah.
like they just don't do this. And so they really don't know. And so when they like want to argue with you about how you should feel or whatever, it's like, you got to take it with a grain of salt that like until you've put yourself in that position, you don't know. And
Yeah.
like that's with every single life experience, you know, like just the general freedom that we as sovereign beings can give to each other of like, I don't know what your experience is. So the way you feel is valid no matter what it is, like instant validation. And yeah, that feels nice.
Just being able to, yeah, just being able to trust in that. That's the other part of it that becomes the journey, is learning to trust that what you have to say or do in any given moment is what's necessary. You know, that these other ideas that we come to get, you know, that these other ideas that we have after the fact of doing whatever we're doing are not essential, you know, to that moment. You know, whatever our thoughts were, actions were, you know, that's what was necessary for that moment. You know, anything added to it particularly takes away from what was necessary for that moment.
That's a big one. That's a big one of like the second guessing and the self doubt after the fact. It'll like
Mm-hmm.
eat you alive and make you never do it again. You know,
Yeah.
like if you just let it swallow you whole and just shit you out, like I'm never doing that again. You know, like
Yeah.
it's a horrible experience to see your naked imperfections right in front of you, documented for the world to see, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, but the rightness of the energy that flows in the moment is like a more dominant belief that I hold, that that is like my anchor in the aftermath of like the second guessing that is so natural. Or like you think of an idea 5 seconds after the Zoom ends of like, oh man, that example would have made that point so much clearer than how I did it. Or I should have said this, or I should have asked this, or whatever it is. And it's like, yeah, but that's not what happened in the moment. So that's not what was meant to happen in the moment. Like
Yeah.
there's just natural acceptance across the board. And maybe those ideas, they do clarify next time I talk about this subject. I'm going to try to like really integrate that example because I think that paints it in such a clear way, or whatever, like resolve to teach with that in the future if you have such a good idea. But for the sake of this moment, whatever gets included is exactly what's meant to be included. Good, bad,
Right.
ugly, gross, wonderful, all of it. And yeah, that
And
can be
that's
a
that.
swallow.
That's the other part of that radical self-acceptance that you hear, you know. How can I, you know, accept myself in any given state, regardless of what it is that's showing up in any given moment, you know, regardless of what anybody else has to say about it, whatever, regardless of what criticism might come as a result of my showing up, you know, how do I still accept myself at, you know, that given moment? And I realize that most of it comes from our upbringing too, you know, how our parents saw us and the things they said to us about us and how we should be. You know, we're still in that state of trying to like look outside of us to find that, like you said, that validation, you know, that what is deemed normal, you know, what is deemed to be social quality. You
Mm.
know, how do we get outside of all that and go, like you said, from negative, what'd you say, negative 20?
Yeah.
You know,
Sounds
just start at the very bottom, you know, and work our way up, and how challenging that can be sometimes, because we still want somebody, at least one person, to say, well, hey, that sounds pretty good, or, you know,
right.
I resonate with that, you know. But even if sometimes we do find out one person, if the whole is not saying it, we're still trying to scrutinize it,
Oh
and
man,
try to.
you got like one comment out of 1,000 that wants to like rip you apart. And it just, I mean, it's your heart that you put out there. So like,
Yeah.
it's sensitive when you open it and it's vulnerable. Like that's the whole point of why vulnerability is scary. Like you're scared, you're sharing something that can be injured. That's like the definition, I think, is it's tender. And
Yeah.
anybody saying anything, even a little bit critical, is, I don't know, it's a growth opportunity for sure to
Yeah.
figure out like, where do I want my value to come from? Like, do I want to be waiting around for somebody else to agree with me that it's good? Or do I want to just know that because of how it felt in the moment and trust that it was what it was meant to be in the moment? Let the
Yeah.
rest
And
of it go.
sometimes, yeah, and sometimes I'll say to a person, like, if they do something and they're a certain way, and I was like, well, the collective needed that expression. The collective needed that individual way of showing up, because it somehow added the piece that was necessary for, the collective to evolve, to find some space or way of harmonizing, finding some way of having a point of view that allows, things to evolve. If we were all the same way, then we would still be having the same issues or the same problems. Yeah, we do on just a human level, but it takes someone stepping outside of that in order for something else to be created, or something else to be brought, so that something can change, you know. But it's oftentimes challenging to accept ourselves as being something that's not like everything else, because we're wanting to socialize, we're wanting to have those interactions where it's in abundance. But then it's like, okay, well, I feel like I'm in this space that it doesn't look like anybody's, you know. And how do I continue to move forward when I don't have someone who actually can chime in and say, well, hey, yeah, I think that this thing, or hey, yeah, I agree with that thing. How do you continue to push forward, when that's not there, into the void of
And
trust and
yeah, what do you
intuition?
think? How do you
Yeah.
trust? Like self-trust, I think, is the answer. Like it has to get stronger. Otherwise, like you got to retreat to safety, which is to say conformity with the others
Yeah.
so they'll agree with you.
Yeah.
Pushing through the abyss where you got to walk through it alone, like to get through it to the other side where you can find the ones that are already there doing what you did. Like, yeah, you got to go it alone. And that takes the self-trust piece, which is a lifetime worth of practice, maybe. I don't know. I'll let you know
Yeah. And
when
I
I'm at.
remember, yeah, it's like, so like, yeah, even in religion, sometimes I remember being, in the religious space very heavily there for a while. And I remember the minister literally saying from the pulpit, you cannot trust your feelings. And at the time, I thought about it when he said it, but because again, I was in this social conditioning, it was like, okay, I'm forced to accept this idea, and I have to trust this other thing that's outside of me to tell me what it is that I should know or what I should feel, you know, and that creates a whole nother, like, mind, if I'm gonna say this word, fuckery, if you will, because it's like, okay, well, I have to constantly go to this thing in order for me to know what I'm supposed to do with my life at any given point in time. And it's crazy, in my processing of it, because it's like, some of those things don't actually align with the way that I'm seeing what's happening in my environment right this moment, you know? What's happening at this particular time. And it doesn't per se fully help me to evolve to what present day things are happening. You know, it's still keeping me stuck to a past problem that it appears that hasn't been really solved or changed. You know, some of the viewpoints that they have towards women in there, man, you know, and I use that also as an example, is this archaic way of seeing that energy, you know, versus creating harmony with it, is creating more of this distrust, more of this, well, I can't trust it because somehow it's going to take advantage of me and corrupt me in some way. And it's like, well, no, if we are with this idea that we have both parts within us, why wouldn't we, you know, want to listen and want to try to build a relationship? Because then we'll have a much more of a balanced perspective of things, you know. But again, these are things that get taught to us that sometimes we don't step outside of to try to challenge and try to see it from a perspective that brings more wholeness and more harmony, you know, between us, you know. And so that's where the situation gets sticky, because it's like, well, I'm feeling something else, you know. I feel like that I should maybe give a lot more credit to the feminine energy, you know, versus relegating it to this thing that they have to walk behind me, you know, that they're not smart enough or they're not strong enough, you know, for certain things, when it's like, well, no, I have not yet given that opportunity, you know, for that to be present and that to show up. So, you know, I know that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. And no, it's never been that way. So that's just not the way it is. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's another background or area that I'm in the process of really deconstructing and really trying to gain a better perspective of a relationship with, because it's in nature, you know. If you think about Earth in itself, what it gives, you know, giving birth to things, you know, that's the feminine energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you guys are contributing to the life of our environment, you know. And so why would we not give you more of an ear? You know, why would we not include you in some of these major world decisions that are being made, you know, because that would also provide balance, you know, to the world if we work more in conjunction with that energy,
Yeah.
versus, you know, being so aggressively, so conflict ridden, you know, mentality.
Yeah. I feel like it's a lot of things. A lot of things. Some, well, like just the basic idea that we are feminine and masculine, that like everybody is both. And
Yeah.
I used to say, as I would talk about this, because I used to believe, and my beliefs have, that's so weird. Pop back in there. Yep, there he is.
It's hard to get.
The recorder's still going. It seems okay. The energy,
Yeah.
like, yeah. Um, okay, so I used to talk about this like I believe some people are like more masculine energy and less feminine, or vice versa. And now I don't even think that's true. I think we are all 50-50 of both of them.
Yeah.
And that through conditioning, we're taught which expression of which is more or less desirable. Like, I think we
Yeah.
both are strong in both of them. And then through the raising, like through culture or socialization, we learn, like, I'm allowed to express these traits, and that, and when I do this other stuff, I get punished or whatever, or get a bad reaction. And we learn how to make our feminine smaller, or make our masculine smaller in response to how we're treated in the world. Like, maybe we are all equal parts of both of them, and there's maybe more or less self-denial happening, more or less
Yeah.
like overcompensation with the other. I don't know, I'm just kind of putting this together. I'll have to give it some contemplation, but it feels really accurate in this moment, that like really they're equal.
Yeah.
It's just how much are you allowing?
Right. And it also depends on like the environment that we're in, because some mothers have to represent both in order for them to raise a child, or for them to perform certain actions, in their lives. They have to use certain energies to get that done.
It's powerful stuff.
This is the one you're gonna have to do some super editing to, I'm sure.
Or not. Dude, this is what it is. This is like powerful energy. I mean, that we are
Yeah.
in. Plus, it is Mercury retrograde. The Scorpio full moon was last night, lunar eclipse, all of these things. This is a powerful energy that we are swimming in at the moment. And yeah,
Yeah.
I'm right there with you when it gets going strong. Technology's like, hey, I want to play. Look, I can
Yeah.
do this. So fun. So
Well,
yeah.
man, back to just the idea of, certain social situations that you have to be in, requires a certain energy to accomplish those things. The masculine has its necessity, and the feminine has its necessity, depending on the situation that you're in. Even when raising a child, you use certain aspects of the masculine and then certain aspects of the feminine. Uh, there's sometimes not the necessity to have this all of just one side, because having all of one side somehow leaves a space for neglect and unattentiveness that's necessary from the other side,
Yeah.
and again, this for me is something new that's showing up in terms of my own understanding. And the only reason why I guess I have that perspective is just watching how my parents interacted with each other. My mom wasn't a very vocal person in terms of her feelings and things that was necessary for her needs. My father was a very aggressive person who was trying to make things in a certain way, but he wanted to do so without the reflection that comes from the feminine. So that's where some of the arguments came in, and some of the things that were happening that were not so good in the home, because he wasn't open enough to take it from another perspective that seemed to be opposing his. But in essence, it would have created a much harmonious situation had he been open to that. But then again, that goes down to the conditioning of what was taught from religion, that the man is at the head of his house, you know. And so the woman was expected to play a certain role, but then my grandfather was like that as well, which created a lot of the just inherited ways in which the feminine energy had been viewed, not one of trust, not one of support, not one that showed love that could be recognized, and so now I'm left with the burden of basically trying to change the way I've shown up in that space, but it's one that does leave me kind of like on the outskirts of what social, acceptance is. And it puts me in a position where if I'm in these spaces of some of this conversation, how much of it am I willing to like be very aggressive about and say, hey, no, maybe we need to take a different approach to this whole thing. We're not getting the things that we need because we're not even opening ourselves up to receive it, because we're not trusting because of what we've been told or what's been modeled in front of us, what's been given to us as this idea, right thing that we've not allowed ourselves to question and, go into and really see what actually resonates with us versus what's been told to us. And it's scary because there's that other side of the ego that's still trying to protect us, keep us in our comfort zones and keep us from experiencing the stuff that we need to kind of go into to change.
Yeah. Mm. All of this is very good. Just soaking it up. this idea of like they are so balanced, you can't not have them both. Like if you don't have them both and you have them both balanced, it doesn't make any sense to me, like how the masculine is going to trip up without the feminine is not necessarily as effective without the masculine. Like there's a symbiotic relationship, a synergistic relationship between the two of them, that when you're willing to engage in receptivity, the feminine, and self-assertion, the masculine, like you can really get something going, like have both of them and feel like true power inside of yourself, and then take it out in the world and like go do something with it, like that's really something, like balancing both of them. And people who deny one side or the other, you're missing it. Like both are incomplete without the other. They both like serve their purpose, they have their functions. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what you think, like how do you see the function of masculine or the function of feminine, and like how they do weave together and we use both of them?
Well, it's interesting you bring up that point because, like I was saying earlier about life, it's the cycle of life. It has to process, it has to go through, both in order for it to be created. Again, when we're talking about the way that the environment, in order for us to survive, we have to have a relationship with it. We can't do without it. There's the energies of them both together is what keeps humanity going. Why is it deteriorating? Because of the relationship. The relationship to it, there's conflict there. There's no distrust, there's no trust there. Even the way that we look at the storms, I'll just use that as just an example. There's this idea that tornadoes and hurricanes and all of that stuff is meant to somehow take us out of here, but there's this other part of it where they don't look at it from that perspective. When of course we're not in what a hurricane's brain or tornado's brain is, but it has a specific purpose in terms of the environment, to help the environment in some way. The masculine and feminine energy, we are created to support one another, to help one another. Regardless of how we identify ourselves, but there should come along with it, how are we living our lives? Are we living our lives with purpose that allows for us to work with each other to create this thing that helps humanity to continue to survive, to continue to move forward, continue to expand, to grow, and love. If we don't have that as a basic perspective in terms of how we live, then of course that's another reason why we don't have the symbiotic relationship that's necessary. I mean, our whole makeup doesn't function the way that it needs to without them both cooperating and working with each other inside. That's why us as men, we're experiencing the PTSD and all these other things, is because we don't have a relationship with nurturing, ourselves, because we've developed this idea that to be girly or to have these certain characteristics are not manly, but in essence, on the flip side of that, we're draining all the energy out of the feminine representations that show up in our lives, because we haven't learned how to balance this stuff within ourselves. We're steadily drawing the energy and doing these things to the feminine energy because we don't necessarily respect it within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we can't create this symbiotic relationship because of the distortions that we carry within ourselves, and I recognize that's on the other side too, from the feminine side. Their relationship to the masculine is also creating that very same thing, as well. There's not the harmony that's necessary. There's that part of themselves that seems to be lacking, that they have to reach outside of themselves in order for them to have something that they've failed to build a relationship within themselves.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my idea and how I see the necessity of having that interworking relationship with both the masculine and feminine energy.
Oh, my brain's like blank because that just all of it. We'll just do an interpretive dance instead. Yeah. At the base of both sides, like I think, maybe, I guess, I don't know because I can only speak for myself, but like it seems like at the base of the disconnect is fear of like, women are afraid. I mean, I rewatched The Handmaid's Tale in completion recently, and there was a quote in there where it said like men are afraid that women will laugh at them and women are afraid that men will kill them, and that this is the fear. And it's like, holy shit, like I don't know if that's real, but I can tell you I've been like looping around it, like as far as, again, what is masculine energy and what is feminine energy. And like obviously I have an astrological slant on how I think about masculine and feminine, because in my mind air and fire signs are the masculine side of us and water and earth sides are the feminine sides of us. So like Scorpio, for example, like the capacity to not only have emotional insight into somebody's deepest, darkest places, but then weaponize that insight to like, with just a few words, deliver maximum pain. Like the feminine is extremely powerful. And I think there is a legitimate fear within men that like, I mean, there could easily be a takeover if we don't like keep this in its place, and like a fear of losing power almost that like like at that point there's like a masculine finding its power in the reflection of having power over something
Yeah.
else, instead of like it's intrinsically in there. We're all born with it and I can feel it. It's my own. I don't have to like dominate other people to find my power. But yeah, like on the feminine side, I mean, there's something real and deeply ingrained about having the weaker physical vessel that, like, I don't know if you're taught your place or you just can feel like the physical disparity that, like, when voices raise, like, you back down immediately because in like a physical altercation, like, you're not the one built to win. That's just
Yeah.
like part of the little vessel, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's like realistic fear on both sides, and fear, you know, like that's what a concept, what a teacher, what a, like, yeah, a teacher to be with.
Well, that going, I guess, confirming that what you were saying, as you were when you were saying that the idea of fear, and that's something that we all show up with, like you said, and then the other side of that fear is the unknown, fear of what we don't know,
Totally.
fear of the fact of, well, they may not necessarily be laughing at me, but am I curious enough to find out what they're laughing and why they're laughing? You know, going beyond that fear of what the answer might be, you know, going beyond the fear of it not necessarily being what we think it is, too. You know, we need to label it. We need to make it something in order for us to feel some sort of security in what we believe about what's happening. You know, we're attached to something that has happened to us before, where maybe we did have someone laugh at us when we tried to show ourselves up in this particular way. But that person that did laugh at us for that particular reason had another reason for doing that. You know, this particular person that we're standing in front of that's laughing may have a whole another reason for laughing. But if we allow ourselves to go beyond that fear and go into the curiosity of it, then we're able to find out something totally different. And then we change the relationship to things too. Because now it's like, well, sometimes it's just whatever that person has in them, it's their thing. It bears no, nothing on me as
Yeah.
a person. And we not allowing ourselves to come to that realization keeps us locked into that fear. And the responses that come as a result of that fear of, yeah, we have to be dominant over, this particular energy, because we're not fully secure in ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not, fully integrating our masculine and feminine energies within ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the same can be said on the feminine side as far as like, in order to overcome that like physical fear or lack of safety, like just no sense of safety in the world, like that is integrating your masculine energy, like your ability to like stand up for yourself, basically, to kick some ass if that's what needs to happen, to like, you know, in the moment, protect
Yeah.
what's valuable. And to be afraid like of someone who's stronger is to say that like I'm afraid I won't be able to protect what's valuable. And that's a really disempowering perspective that is lacking masculine integration, you know? Like I think there's room on both sides to like come together in the middle of, I would imagine basically every person on the planet could stand to further integrate one or the other. And it's not always dictated by like your biological gender, like what you were born with. Like I think
Mhm.
there's totally possible to, like in my case, I think is a good example where I feel like I'm more on the masculine side of forgiving my own feminine energy and integrating my own receptivity and healing that side of myself. And the masculine is more dominant. It's more like
Yeah.
out of the box, ready to rock and roll. And which came with its own reflection growing up in this culture where, I mean, I definitely was born at the time where that behavior from women was more accepted than it had been, for sure, even 20 or 30 years before. But there's still plenty of remnants of men who expect women to be seen and not heard, and like, you know,
Serving.
that's not your place. Like, you know, what a bitch, or like, who does she think she is, or like these kinds of things where I'm like, I'm a person who has thoughts. Like, why don't you want to hear them? That doesn't make sense to me. So yeah, I think it's like each individual soul probably has room to move closer to the middle of like fully integrating and healing both parts. And probably we all have room to heal both parts, you know?
Yes.
Like, yes.
And that's the only way it's going to change the relationship to the planet, change the relationship to, you know, humanity, is, you know, by learning our energies that we carry and how we can make that more harmonious within ourselves, but then and then also take that out, like you said, to the collective and try to be a source of change, you know, for the things that has been taking place in humanity. So it's, again, this is just a road that I've barely scratched the surface with, you know, understanding. But it does suit me as a place of purpose for myself. You know, if I want to be able to, you know, have a better experience in life, then integrating those parts of myself and clearing up some of the distortions that I've had with it, so that I can be a better product and show up in more authentic and genuine ways. and lose some of the anger that shows up with the feminine as being this, you know, them not showing up and supporting me in the ways that I feel like I need, you know. But if I'm working with the energy within myself and clearing that up, then I can see the other person just the way they need to be seen.
Yeah. Say more about like cleaning up the distortions. Like when you maybe, or do you have an example of like recognizing a particular distortion and then, yeah, like where do you go from there?
Well, I guess just the idea of distrust in the feminine energy. Um, like you used earlier as an example of men feel like women are going to laugh at them. You know, if I'm using that as a premise of how I'm responding to the feminine energy, then I'm not getting the full story. You know, because then again, each individual is different, and you know, not giving credit to each individual for how they're showing up in wherever they are is going to be a distortion, because I'm walking around with this idea of all feminine energies having this perspective. Then I'm not going to certainly develop the necessary trust that I need to interact with that energy. But then also there's that deeper sense of I don't have a real good relationship with the feminine that's inside of myself. You know, I'm feeling like I have to be this macho, strong person, you know, when in actuality, I may need to be more nurturing, you know, and more compassionate in terms of my approach to things. in certain instances. So the distortion that I've, may have carried again from what my father's perspective of the feminine energy and how it's to be treated. If I'm not challenging that distortion of that relationship, then I'm going to continue to perpetuate the narrative that men show up with, the feminine energy, and I'm going to perpetuate this idea of them not deserving to be trusted. That's some of the distortions that I can come up with, without necessarily going into an very exact detail, but enough to say that, well, you just put in the blank here. When you come in contact with a masculine energy, what's the first thing you think? And we could just use this idea of that we're going to kill you. Well, that particular masculine energy that's in front of you may be something totally different. He may not necessarily have that energy at all. His energy may be to understand, but if you're carrying that in the back of your mind, you're not fully engaged in the energy necessary to help that masculine energy understand of different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because somehow you're holding yourself in this space of fear of what he might do to you, And then the other thing about, I'll use this for an example, and I don't know how far you want to go into the rabbit hole of this one, is the ideas of race. There was a perspective that Black people, were either going to steal from you, somehow take advantage of you, somehow harm you in some way. But of course, it took somebody being willing to listen and to engage in conversation with a Black person to realize, oh, well, hell, that's not the general consensus of this thing. There's other characters that, show up in this particular race, but if you don't, if you don't challenge that, then you're walking around with that distortion or that idea of what you think this particular race is or is about, when you can see clearly that it's not the truth. There's a whole nother example out there, but if you're carrying around that distortion of what you think, that then you'll never go into that space of trying to see something different.
Well, and so this base level fear that I think is what keeps us separate is like, I mean, fear is about self-protection. Like when we're afraid, it's about like preserving our own life. And fear is like almost inherited like through our physical vessels. Like I think personally, just like, I mean, through our mom's emotions during pregnancy, through like how our birth went, through those first like couple months, especially, like we pick up the tone of whatever environment we plop into. And yeah, like that self-protective instinct is normal and natural. And yet, like I see it in my dog Scooby all the time, where like she'll get so afraid and she'll yell and bark and run around and act crazy. And there's like nothing to be afraid of. And when it's that situation, it's so easy to like laugh at her and tell her like, Scooby, come on, like there's nothing to be scared of, like shush. And when it's me in my fear and my self-protective mode, I'm doing it myself. And yeah, it's like the self-protective side, like how do you get past that? And I think it comes back to the self-trust piece that we were talking about, like knowing that you can fall back on yourself anytime you need to. So it's safe to engage with other people because worst case scenario, you'll just fall back on yourself. And yeah, I definitely am like only just beginning to have like a strong enough sense of self where the thought of engaging in disagreement like openly on purpose, like I'm not scared of conflict anymore, or trying not to be, that I'm open to that experience. It's definitely leveling up my self-trust and like my ability to soothe myself even when somebody else disagrees with me. That like, I don't know if this is part of the feminine energy, but like to think that if someone disagrees with me, I could lose my life over it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like a real possibility, even though I've obviously in this lifetime never been killed for my beliefs. It still feels
Yeah.
like it's like this far away from happening at any given time. And so sharing your beliefs and having somebody disagree with you is scary. Like, so this retreat and self-preservation is so natural, but I feel like, you know, that's where I'm practicing healing my masculine side as well, to like own my beliefs and speak my truth and show up in the world and stand my ground and declare boldly that this is who I am and this is the purpose that I serve. And if people have an issue with that, that's their task. You know, theoretically, this is my understanding.
Right.
Trying to
Right.
drag it down into my body piece by piece. So, yeah. But self-preservation, like the urge to protect ourselves, it's so strong and something to contend with. Like that fear can easily shut you down at any moment. And how do you keep it from shutting you down and just retreating into, I'm not going to challenge the stereotype. I'm sure that my dad was afraid for a reason. I'm sure he had his reasons. I'm just not going to face that fear either. Like, yeah, how do you push past the self-preservation and open up to the unknown, like to trust that you're going to be okay?
Yeah. That's the going back to the curiosity piece. When you lose the curiosity, then you somehow lose the drive to want to learn more and to expand more on relationships with things. It's because during the curiosity you're willing to step just a little past what your firm idea is about something to learn something else that may change that. If we've held on to a certain belief for so long, we've given it all its credit, but yet we're unwilling to challenge it. Then is it truly, a firm foundation of truth to stand on? If we can't take it into other spaces and other circles and have other people say something about it, in a way that they might not necessarily agree with, but we can still feel like we haven't lost or gained anything in the process, but we've just recognized an experience that was necessary for us to have at that particular moment that might serve that person, something to cause them to think or to change, but then also reflect something within us that we could, keep evolving and changing.
Mm. Like, just to kind of, the firm example that's in my mind is when you say something to someone that triggers them and
Yeah.
you didn't try to trigger them. You didn't wake up this morning being like, I wonder who I can trigger today, but it
Right.
happened. And maybe even what you said was something that like, wow, like I wish I wouldn't have been so harsh, or like there was something about it that you wish you could just reissue that statement and maybe it wouldn't have triggered them, maybe it still would have. But like, to be okay with having triggered them and to take it and try to like approach situations with greater kindness and more pause to get a hold of like, what is it ultimately that I want to impact here, not just like what am I going to pop off and say in the moment.
Right.
um but to like genuinely be okay that like if the other person manifested that experience, that like there was something in it for their consciousness also. And that kind of also takes me back to this other point of like trusting, kind of how we were saying at the beginning, like trusting that whatever gets included is what was meant to be. And how do we even, like when we judge ourselves and say like, oh, I was too forceful, or I was too aggressive, or I was too this or that, it's like, how do you know what the right amount of force actually is? Like, are you sure that you're fully deconditioned out of what society has taught you? And, you know, maybe that really was like an authentic expression. And
Yeah.
like, maybe society just doesn't even understand like what, like we're so tame, you know, like we're so like inhibited and abiding by like the niceties and the courtesies and the tradition of like society and the fabric of society. Like, and I'm not to say like light the thing on fire and like let's do away with it, but we play by the rules so often so that like when we do step outside the lines, it's like so easy to judge ourselves. And then at the same time it's like, no, but who says that that wasn't exactly the perfect thing, that like the
Right.
world needed that stroke of fire in that moment? Like, good job, that was perfect.
Yeah.
You know, like,
And look at and to look at all the changes that get made as a result of that too, you know, and sometimes as much as we criticize conflict, even in conflict, it does bring about certain changes that are necessary for the evolvement of our, you know, our world. You know, someone possibly going against a certain perspective of idea that's, you know, being prevalent over another, with, you know, without someone going in and saying something to them about it, or calling them to be accountable for those decisions based on that, you know, is what keeps perpetuating the same. You know, and it's, I guess it's not so much of a group of individuals that get together and sometimes make it. Sometimes it is the individual themselves, you know, by being that representation of themselves in the, you know, most authentic way that brings about that change for the many, you know. And sometimes the fear and all that stuff, what is it based on? That
right.
goes back to another point. How do we gauge whether that fear is really something that actually comes from us? You know, what if it's coming from outside of us and it's been motivating us all this time, but we haven't challenged it, we haven't done anything with it that would allow us to think beyond it.
Well, and I feel like, you know, I think those fears are coming to light, at least for me. These last couple days have been very illuminating. The Scorpio full moon is like, that's kind of the prediction. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the little fragments and pieces from my past, that it was so easy to think and say like, oh, I've healed that, I worked through that a long time ago. And then it's like, oh no, here's a little smudge of this and a little smudge of that, and all of these distortions that, I mean, are very much just in my story. It's like just in the way I look at my past, in the way I view what happened in my life. And as they came up and I was like really aware of the story that I was telling, it was like the story itself just kind of like unfolded and got bigger and more allowing and acknowledging that it was a way more mixed bag than how my brain like previously remembered it. Like, you know, we tell our story and we basically shape our past. I mean, our past is like a big clump of modeling clay, and the way we tell our story, like we make a sculpture out of it. And like we can tell a different story. We can re-include certain parts that we don't include, like the gratitude for how good certain parts of it were, you know, like giving full credit to the good and the bad. And I think all of that kind of relates to like giving full credit to the light and the dark, the masculine
Yeah.
and the feminine.
Yeah.
Like just even the new moon, which is like one of
Symbiotic.
what's that?
I said symbiotic.
Yes, yes, like balancing everything, like balancing
Hmm.
anything in life of like the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, like all of it could come back to balancing the masculine and the feminine in the light and the dark. And like it's it's just a really common thing to be afraid of like the dark. And I think even a lot of women are not allowing their emotions necessarily. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's safe to assume anybody is like totally healed in the feminine, because even like I said, like my own feminine energy, I feel like I have still like an internalized judgment, and like a like feminine is less than, not as powerful. Like I'm still in the process of reallocating power back to the feminine energy. That like, I mean, in the darkest dark, there is potent creative forces at play. And
Yeah.
knowing how to be in that dark space is powerful. And like being able to withstand it is powerful. And yeah, I think the more it gets locked away, like the more it pops out in maybe destructive or unproductive ways. And that's where we can get even more afraid of like, oh shit, well, you don't want to let that out. Well, like it's only bad because we didn't flow it
Yeah.
proactively. You know, we weren't addressing it in real time. We were denying it, and then it explodes in unfortunate ways, which absolutely can happen. Bubbles over.
Yeah. Yeah. I was, it's funny because my a friend I was telling you about, there's this book that we've been reading together, and it's an amazing book, and I'm sure you probably heard about it. It's called If Women Rose Rooted. I don't know if you've had
Never heard
any
of it.
interaction. Yeah. Oh man, you've got to read the book, man. I mean, I'm a guy, and I just chose to look at it from a like just to explore what women who are fighting, and I use the word fighting, but who are trying to empower women from a very healthy, balanced perspective. Um, some of the things that they talk about in the book is how women themselves are at odds with one another, you know, and they're at odds with one another because of the masculine representation that has been modeled in front of them. So there's that other context to this symbiotic relationship, that women are in conflict with one another based on this thing that's been modeled in front of them of what it's supposed to be from a masculine perspective.
Yeah.
And you know, as we go through the pages of the book, I even feel this the masculine portion of me that wants to rebel and be like, no, that's not totally the case in this particular situation. But it's interesting because I can watch it and observe it, and
Yeah.
then turn it and try to invite the feminine inside of me to come in concert with what's being said, to give me more context as to how I can go about my own masculine representation, and how I can show up more in balance and more in harmony with the feminine energy because of this understanding. It's like now it takes some of the nuances in terms of how to interact and how to show up
Mm.
in those relationships, and understand there's this reason why this perspective of women are crazy comes from, is because the feminine is now having trouble being balanced with their emotions, because they're been told that what they're saying and feeling is crazy.
Yeah.
When in actuality, it's not that it's crazy. It's this period of where this unexpressed portion of themselves doesn't get expressed for a long period of time. So it shows up in this idea of being crazy,
Yeah.
you know? And because there's the masculine has created such a dominance where that can't be fully heard or received, that's why we feel the way that we feel about the masculine energy. I mean, excuse me, about the feminine energy, you know? When we don't have a good relationship with our emotions as men, so now we're demonizing the feminine expression of emotions, you know? And so it's crazy being, like I said, a masculine on the other side of this and like really being intrigued by all this. It's like, oh my God, there's so much beauty in the feminine energy, man. There's so much beauty in their representation. You know, I love it, you know, but why am I not allowing it to be integrated into my own self?
Yeah.
You know?
I'm a big believer that, like, basically we treat others the way that we treat ourselves. And so, like, it's not possible to like treat other people better if you can't like treat yourself better first. Like, this
Yeah.
whole idea that, like, yeah, I'm gonna integrate all of this and I'm gonna heal it inside myself, because if I can't give myself grace with my emotions, how can I possibly allow grace for other people's wild and crazy emotions, like the tornadoes that come through, that from the outside you're like, fuck, like that's a disaster, that ripped apart everything, oh my God, how are we ever going to rebuild? And the divinity of like the timing of that destruction was exactly what needed to happen, like that
Yeah.
that force that ripped apart what was like beautiful clean slate.
Yeah.
Like, we're ready to rebuild. That's great. That's like the beauty of the feminine, that yeah, the masculine like wants to be like, no, I want to preserve everything that's been built. I'm not willing for this like turbulent like tower card, if you're familiar with tarot, like style moment,
Yeah.
like let's just burn it all to the ground and see what we can get from the ashes kind of thing. Like the
Yeah.
masculine gets real shaky in the face of like just emotional turbulence, like unbridled. I know for me especially, like I had some massive outbursts in my first 20 years that like made me scared of my own emotions, like the ferocity of them, the way that the volcano can erupt, all by itself. Like if you're not honoring it, it will eventually come out on its own, and then you don't get to say where it went or who it hit, or like, yeah, you're just sending cannonballs out into the world, and like wherever they land is not your call, and that
Right.
just doesn't feel good. And so instead of learning how to flow my energy, I more was like, how do I just like numb out my emotions as much as possible? And I need to like
Impressive.
get control of myself. And like that was the approach for like the next 8 years. And then I found Abraham Hicks and like emotions are your guidance system. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, that makes more sense. All right, I'm getting it now. Good.
That's another reason why we're so, as men, we're so, so war driven and so conflict ridden, is because we do repress things. We don't have a good relationship with our emotions so that we can express them in ways that are healthy, you know, where I can witness my anger and then sit with it for a moment and understand, okay, well, it's coming up because it's trying to give me a message about something,
Yeah.
a message about how to take care of myself in this moment that maybe I might not be feeling like I'm getting, a need that I may not be getting met. Maybe if that need may be something that I'm responsible for totally, versus trying to force someone outside of me to show up in a way to meet that need, and yes, I understand in order for us to have human relationships, there are certain things that a person outside of us can provide, But if we haven't worked with the things that we are responsible for, and then we go out and we try to make someone else responsible, then that puts undue stress on the relationship, which creates the conflict and the breakdown in the relationship of the masculine and feminine. You know, we haven't totally respected the ways in which each energy shows up. So, of course, we're going to have problems in our environment.
And then a storm has to come through and rebalance the environment. And heaven help, like, the weak structures when the storm comes through. Because, yeah, like an emotional storm can crush a weak relationship. And it's like, oh shit, now my emotions like ruined my life. It's like, no, that relationship, if it was weak enough to be crushed by that emotional storm, like it was never going to stand the test of time anyway, for one thing.
Right.
You know, like maybe that temper tantrum that you threw was like the best thing that ever happened to you. Maybe you dodged a bullet with the fact that that structure got crushed and you had to start over with something different. Like, we don't know, you know, like I tend to believe that like our emotions protect us as much as, you know, that fear, like even sometimes it can be overblown or whatever, out of proportion. But ultimately, like when we throw a fit, when we get mad and go off, like it's usually helping in some way of like burning something that needed to be burnt in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, like my mom one time, this is just a recent example, like with an employee even, and I don't advocate this behavior, but what happened was my mom got mad at her employee after feeling like she's given her credit and benefit of the doubt and cutting her slack and like doing all of this maybe way longer than she should have, but should have been more direct way earlier on. But eventually she gets mad and she explodes at the employee, and the employee quits as a result. And then in the wake of the employee quitting, it's like there's all of these things that we find out that like, holy shit, like if we had known all of these things that she was doing and like getting away with, because nobody knew that the employee was doing it, we would have let her go a long time ago. So in the bigger picture of the well-being of like what the goal is, like we're trying to like do good business here at our store. I mean, mom blowing up in that moment was kind of like the best thing that could have happened. Could it have been more graceful and prettier? Sure. But it definitely helped. It was like the best possible outcome, I think, for everybody involved. So
yeah, I had a similar interaction that where there was a friend of mine. We were having a gathering. We were having what we would call I would call a men's gathering, where we were going to talk about issues that are, you know, specifically related to us as men. Mm-hmm. And so we have these rules or whatever that we wanted to establish to create a safe container for us to do that. And so, you know, one of the individuals happened to have a brother, or I'm saying happened to have a brother, it was his brother. They were having something that was going on between them two. And so it ended up kind of bleeding into the group, you know. And so in my mind, it was one of those situations where it's okay, you know, you're trying to hold space for what's happening. You know, maybe I'm seeing this thing in a perspective that is, you know, maybe not truly with all the facts of things. But as we would continue to go on in the situation, well, later on, before we close everything, they end up having another interaction with each other. And so at that point, rather than me kind of not like saying anything about it, I decided to make comment about it, like, you know, hey, something needs to be done different with the way the thing is happening. And it was kind of almost like I was blowing up kind of thing, you know, because I had sat and listened to it for a while. And, you know, I'm kind of like, well, man, I'm just actually tired of this shit. You know, whatever you guys got that you're dealing with, maybe you guys can deal with this another time, versus it being right now, because apparently it's starting to become like a pitted thing where everything is being focused on it when it doesn't have anything to do with us,
right,
or everyone else. It's something that clearly you guys need to work out, and it doesn't need to be here, you know. And the kind of the same situation after I stepped back from it, I felt really bad for having, said something in the way that I said it, and later on, I went to both of the individuals and spoke to them and made my apologies for how I expressed myself or whatever. But then what ended up happening is that I started to become resentful about it. Like, wait a minute. This is something that clearly affects my boundaries, my safety, in this space. So why in the hell shouldn't I be saying something about it? If this is supposed to be a place where we're supposed to be dealing with the concerns of us as men, and standing up for something that crosses my boundaries or makes me feel unsafe, I should be able to say something about it, and I shouldn't feel bad about it, that this is affecting me, and I'm doing what's right based on my own internal resonance of what is going to be for my health to respond and say something to the situation. And why am I apologizing for it? Why in the hell am I apologizing for me saying, hey, you guys need to take this shit somewhere else? I didn't quite say it in that exact way, but in so many, words I said it. And for me to internalize it as I've done something wrong, is not right either.
yeah,
They should have been able to be in the space of receiving what I said, instead of it being, well, you could have said it differently, you could have not said it, and it's like, well, hold on a minute. I'm supposed to hold space for you guys to act like this between each other, and it be totally not within the framework of what we said was going to be going on in this situation. Yeah, it needed to be said, because yeah, something needed to change in terms of how you guys were interacting with each other and how you saw yourselves in this space of it being self-absorbent to the point where no one else mattered
yeah,
in the situation. No one else's care is being considered in this situation. And so it's another situation where the masculine male energy showed up, but it was for the protection of the quote unquote feminine within inside, because here it is, some emotions that are showing up as a result of something happening. I need to protect myself, in this particular instance. If I'm going to be here, then I need to feel safe in this particular context, which, having that interaction or having that situation happen did, in turn put me in this position of, well, you know what, maybe this is not so safe for me. Maybe if this is going to be a problem for me to express myself in this way, then maybe this is not the group for me to be in.
mm,
Maybe I need to change my association or surrounding. Yeah, I can still be friends and things of that nature, but if I'm not going to be, heard in terms of what's going to be safe for me, then no, I don't need to be there, you know? And I hadn't gotten an opportunity to talk to them about this, the last part of that realization, which I will, but it also goes back to that self-preservation of what's healthy, what's balanced,
yeah,
if you will, in the situation, and what's going to create change for the situation, because that's what we got together for, right? We were there to discuss the things that are, important to the masculine, and how we can go about the changes necessary to be more balanced in our masculine roles. And, and if I can't say something that's going to challenge that perspective, if I'm going to be required to just go along, then no, that's not the space for me,
Well, I mean, that would be very much denying the feminine, because here you are like emotionally uncomfortable in what they're doing back and forth. And yeah, like we agree, this is going to be a safe space. And like you said, like protecting something bigger, like I think that's where our anger is capable of like bursting forth in moments where we feel like, oh shit, like I shouldn't have done that. Like, but almost always, like when you look back, like there was something bigger at stake. And you, I mean, and I know from my own times of like, basically, I didn't have the guts to deal with it when it was only this big. And it wasn't until it was really big and up against me that I felt like, oh shit. And then your anger is what, like the tool that gets you through that moment. But the outburst like needed to happen. Like, and in terms of the whole point of the group being to discuss like the changes of what needs to be integrated for the masculine to like do what it does, like maybe your outburst was exactly exactly the whole point of like, this is what the masculine needs to integrate, like this bickering between the two of you where like, trying to find the right one, or I don't know exactly what they were doing, but like,
yeah,
there's room and space for everybody to feel what they're feeling. And like, we don't have to attack each other, like, but you sat with it so long that, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, anger is the only tool that's going to get the job done. Like when you need
yeah.
to stand up for that bigger thing, whatever that is.
And apparently it becomes a reoccurring thing for us as men sometimes, if we're so dominating in our terms of our approach to things. We're not taking consideration as to the feminine or the other in the situation. That's how we continue to have these destructive, distorted ways of doing things, because we're not challenging it. We're just going along with, what's there, because there's so many people who believe this one thing or this other thing that it's impossible for us to change the way things are being done in the conscious environment. My approach to getting or gaining a better relationship with the feminine is something totally my own pursuit, you know, totally my own way of approaching what's going on in my life. And it does have something to do with how the past has been done with things, and how I'm starting to get, very cynical about the way that women and men show up when we're in the, in spaces with one another, and how I desire to have more of a harmonious relationship with the feminine, because I do enjoy the feminine energy. I do enjoy what she represents, what she inspires, and sometimes it's not within the ways in which men are taught to interact with that energy, man. And so, it does find me in this space sometimes where I'm, not around a lot of people, yet I'm around a lot of people, if I'm making sense there, I can be in a space where it's all men, but feel that I'm not a part of the space of all men, because of my conversation is different and my perspective is different. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's not men out there, but I'm saying typically when I show up to a space where it's all men, right off the bat, I'm already believing, they're not on the same page of my understanding of this thing, or of my perspective of how to interact with women, and I understand a lot of it too is because of their conditioning, what they've been influenced by, but it's so strong enough in me that I'm trying to do a better job of taking down those stereotypes and deconstructing the conditioning that I've had within myself with the feminine energy, because it feels good, not because nobody's there telling me it's right or wrong. And then I guess now this goes back to how we establish the trust, based on where you said the feminine feels, maybe I'm leaning into that, more. I'm leaning into what it actually feels right. That's the determining factor of seeing what I'm seeing is based on what I'm feeling. And there's an intuitive aspect to it as well, because there's, you just know what you know sometimes. And knowing what you know sometimes intuitively is not always based on what has been influenced or what's being told that's right. It's something that is deeper than that, something at the core of who you are that's basically guiding you towards this thing or this particular perspective. And it's like, it doesn't matter if somebody agrees with it, you just go with it, and then you just kind of, whatever happens as a result of that, you're already kind of telling yourself that I'm ready to deal with it because I'm tired of this other thing. I'm tired of having this relationship that I'm having with the feminine energy, but there's no one out here who's telling you how it should be in the ways that resonate with you. So you have to go some other route, being told at one time when I was young, my mom, unfortunately, my mom says, well, I don't care about you, I don't care about you being mad, and it's like, well, wait a minute, man, which probably is what kind of created this distrust with the feminine energy, because here's a feminine energy telling you they don't care about your emotions, or, better yet, being in a relationship with someone and they're not necessarily giving what you feel some consideration, that's creating distrust, and you have enough of them, a string of them, then guess what? That's what your perspective is going to be. But then again, that's based on what you're attracting to. So there's that other nuance that's associated with it. So that's a rabbit hole. I'm sorry.
I like when she said, I don't care if you're mad, like that part, just like, I mean, I felt that like dagger to the heart kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it instantly gave me a picture of like, we treat others how we treat ourselves. Like, she doesn't care if she's mad, is really what she just said, like, you think?
Yeah, there's a relationship where, as you're saying, that she wasn't allowed to have her own emotions heard or respected.
Exactly.
And so then she didn't fully validate them within herself, so that they were things that she could stand up for and express. I'm in a situation where I'm expressing something. So in turn, she's not going to have any context in terms of how to receive that, go beyond that fear of her own emotions that she hadn't been able to express. So having the ability to be comfortable to listen to me express mine wasn't going to be there.
Yeah. I mean, they they like parents in general, like I'm not a parent, so I still a lot think of the parent-child relationship from the side of the child. Um, but it's like parents have their own wounds. They like in most cases they got it way worse than we did, you know?
Mhm.
Like when I really track back to like how was my mom treated? I mean, she treated us like royalty compared to that. And
Yeah.
not that my grandparents were bad, like just as of the times, this is how you raise kids. When they
Yeah.
stay out past curfew, you beat the shit out of them.
Yeah.
Like
That was
on the front
beatings.
yard, like with a
Yeah.
belt, like with implements, like you beat them. That's how
Yeah.
you teach them that that's not allowed. And like, so she got like a beating like multiple times. I
Yeah.
never got one. You know, she invalidated my feelings and that hurts. And don't get me wrong, I'm like right there with you. Like that fucking sucks. But like, she was barely allowed to live. Like that was her punishment. Like, we're going to physically beat you. And
Yeah.
that's how they learned like emotions don't matter. They don't get
Yeah.
anywhere, you know, like you're going to get beat if you don't follow the rules. That's all that matters. So like
And
they
then
were
the other,
taught, they know in their experience that this is how it works. And I believe they had the best intentions when they were trying to teach us like this is
and
how
then
it
when
works.
you're right, and then when you're actually getting the beatings, the other thing that makes it even more difficult is they say, "Shut up the crying, for I give you something to cry for. Stop crying." I was like, hold on a minute.
Hold
What you're
on.
doing to me is forcing this response, and now you're telling me I can't have that response. What the hell? Makes you even more confused.
Yeah.
Like certain emotions are not allowed to be expressed, you know? And on top of you being whatever gender you identify with, you know, you put that on top of not being able to express yourself in those in healthy ways in that perspective. So it's a vicious thing they call trauma.
Yeah. It's like universal human trauma almost, like just from our culture of like, no matter if you're male or female biologically, like if you express volatile emotions, it's not good. It's not going
Yeah,
to go well for you. It doesn't matter. Like the label may be different if you're a man versus a woman, but nobody's comfortable and they will ostracize you. they will they will make you go away to take the emotional turbulence away. Like, yeah, I mean, there it's just reinforced from every angle that like civil behavior, like staying calm is necessary. And I get that, but at the same time, like when you're highly sensitive and you can feel like the literal injustices that run rampant in this world, like there's a lot to be upset about, and there has to be room for that too. Like it's part of the experience. That upset, that divine rage and disgust at the things that we witness, like there has to be room to express that and then allow it to move us forward. Like
that's
to,
how we grow.
yeah, to like get us busted out of like, well, that's just how it's always been. Well, fuck that. Like that's not a reason to do anything ever, ever. And some of the things we do for so long are like, well, that's just how it works. And that's just the way we understand it. And it's like, no, you're just keeping yourself there rather than like taking in the new information. And I'm thinking about like how long slavery as an institution lasted, or like withholding women's rights in general, or like lots of different things that
Right.
it's taking us a long time, like a really shockingly long time to figure out that like human beings are actually like all equal. Like there's really not like anything that would make one human superior to another human. That's just not how it works.
Right.
It's like we're still learning this, and that's just mind blowing, you know? But
Coming out of the structures that have been put in place to somehow preserve like certain ways of controlling things. It's like if you're not going to challenge it and change it, it keeps perpetuating these cycles of things that hold back the evolution process sometimes. You know, you still have those situations where things are able to progress, but it's such a slow process, such a slow process. And I think right now, I think you may have said it earlier, we're finally in a place where we're able to really change some stuff, you know, because of the generation that's coming around now. You know, of course, they have more access to information, so we don't have to do it like we used to. We had to wait for the elders to give it to us in order for us to know about it. Now we can just go online and find out. And we can go online and find out a bunch of different perspectives too, as well. And we're not pigeonholed in this one, particular perspective that seems to be the narrative of how things are done.
Yeah. 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 It's just like getting easier and easier with that access to technology to see that, like, the dogma that you're raised in, which, I mean, I would argue like most of the whole world is just dogmatic, just like static. And you just like, you yourself can move in and out of like different energies and viewpoints and philosophies and ways of being. But like most places on earth, like they are what they are. And yeah, there's a lot, like kind of going back to, like, I think what gives me hope about all of this is knowing that no matter what conditioning we receive, we still have our connection to like the divine energy or source energy or God or the universe or whatever, where like we know love for ourselves. And that is really truly dominant, like no matter what we get taught. So like even when we're sitting in church and they tell us like don't trust our emotions or whatever it is, whatever example, it's like, no, but I can feel on the inside that this is right, this is true, but you're telling me it's not. Like there's that happens all the time. There's that ability to like feel your own truth in the face of opposition, or at least like opposite truth. You know, somebody trying to push you in one direction like helps you see like what is your true direction, even if it's not where they're trying to push you. That's still illuminating, like that's still helpful. And so it gives me hope that like the people that are out there teaching things that maybe I personally would consider damaging or like, yeah, just damaging. Each individual has their own ability to feel for themselves, you know, like, and even if you grow up in, say, like a really racist family or area, like it's still possible to feel for yourself how wrong that really is. That like, I just like fundamentally don't understand this hatred that is dripping off of you. Why? And it just like, yeah, like the racist roots like just never took in my soil. Like my inner truth just like wouldn't allow that viewpoint to like take hold. It never made sense to me, even though I was like repeatedly exposed to racist perspectives in my upbringing. Like that just isn't right. It's just not. We're equal. That like stereotype of like I'm gonna put everybody together based on this factor and I hate them, like that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't care which group you're putting in the spotlight, like whether it's race or gender or religion or whatever, like to just do that, like that kind of blind hate. Like why would you hate an individual, let alone a whole group of people that you don't even know?
And there's so much insecurity in it too, you know, because like you said, the reasons that they bring up are not founded on something that can withstand the other perspectives that might be given to the individual, you know, to see something different. It's impossible to stay there once you come in contact with other information that says, oh wow, I've been doing this thing all this time and I actually really don't have any relationship to it. It's just something that someone else's idea of things. And when you come in contact with somebody who is of the other race, and you actually talk to them, then it's like, oh shit, this is totally different, totally different than what I was told, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Than what I was told. Like, that's the really interesting part that like really gave me a broader compassion for people who do hate based on something like race. Because like in the, early part of the 20th century, like the early 1900s, like the stereotypes that were portrayed in movies and eventually on TV, like they really perpetuated like a very specific image of what it meant to have black skin compared to what it meant to have white skin. Like they basically taught the population without coming right out and saying like, here's how it works. They just showed you a picture and you're like, oh, great, that's how it works. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
And they just filed it under like, good to know. And they went forward like with that stereotype in mind. And that was definitely like my grandparents' upbringing, like that time. And that exact experience of when you actually stop and talk to somebody that is of a different race, like you realize, holy shit, I think we're both just human. Maybe it's really not as different as I thought it was going to be. And that experience happened to my grandpa during his lifetime. And I'm very grateful. We went to a public speaking contest where the person who was running the event was a Black person. And you could just tell, like, my grandpa was very uncomfortable from the beginning. And as it went on, I mean, he was there to watch me speak. And I mean, when he did that, he just like lit up like the freaking sun. So he got happy during the event. And then at the end, he went up to tell the guy that, like, this was a really good event, like ran very smoothly. And we had to wait. We were the last ones there because they stood there and talked for like 30 minutes. And the whole way home, like what I remember most, which again, I just like couldn't understand like how this was the primary emotion that he had, was disbelief. He was like, I just can't believe that that's how he was. Like, that doesn't make, like, he was just confused, was like the main takeaway. And so I'm sure that, like, he continued to process it long after. I never talked to him about it again. But that was like a beautiful moment where through that experience, like, he definitely had his eyes opened, and in the face of it, he went with it. And I was like, wow, that's good. See, those kinds of like spontaneous moments can happen anytime, even to a person who is like annoyingly strict in their beliefs, the way they are,
And that makes them more susceptible to find themselves in those types of situations. Even a person who has like an extreme hate, at some point, life puts them in a position where they have to have help from the ones that they have the hate for.
Yeah. Or you're like sitting in the audience and you have to listen. You're there to hear your granddaughter speak. She's your pride and joy, your only granddaughter. And now you're like, the whole thing has brought you to a moment where you got to sit there and listen to this person who you would never, like, and it opened something new. And getting to witness that was really, at the time, maybe not like super powerful. I was glad, I remember that. But like in this moment, it really does give me hope about what's possible at any moment for anybody, right? Like, and so to not give up hope that no one is a lost cause, as far as like, oh shit, they're so full of hate, like they're never going to come back to the love. Like, I don't know. I don't I don't know if they're alive, there's room for more love, you know?
Yeah,
It's
somewhere a seed gets planted somewhere.
yeah. And that's powerful.
Hmm.
Mm.
But then it also gives us some context as to even the ones who don't necessarily have those hangups. What is our hangup? You know, what is that thing that we've been living from and we haven't necessarily challenged it to see its validity? What thing in our lives have we just firmly rooted ourselves into and haven't allowed ourselves to see any different perspectives about it? You know,
Yeah.
that's because we can get, even me myself can get comfortable sometimes in this idea of, well, I have this viewpoint of things that's different and all of that, but uh, am, am I searching for individuals that will confirm or deny what it is I'm saying? You know, am I, willing to have it taken apart just to realize that, well, there's some aspects of it that's good, but I'm willing to see some, this other approach and try it and see what happens, not that it, because then it sounds like we're getting back into this relying on other people to tell us something for us to change kind of thing. But it has to be something that we are willing to do within ourselves, because there's nobody there holding us accountable to it, right? You know, there's nobody there, basically telling us, well, you're saying this wrong or that wrong, or thinking this or that, this wrong or that wrong. You know, we we're going into it almost kind of like a blind thing sometimes. And especially when I was talking about being in this place of being intuitive about stuff, it's like you don't always have someone there confirming what it is that you're feeling intuitive about. You just go ahead and do it, you know, without knowing what the results are going to be, or not holding to what the results are going to be. Just go into it with this idea of curiosity and open mindedness to receive information that might give you an expanded perspective on how you've been living.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think the willingness to let your beliefs be taken apart so that somebody else can like see for themselves, like, here are the pieces that I'm working with. And in that process, yeah, you yourself may get more clarity or a different perspective or whatever. And yeah, like, oh, I'm feeling my own like need to be right, like the way that that can bubble up. And like, I don't want to be wrong, or I need to be right. I don't want, like, being told that you're wrong is hard, like all of that, that is basically ego, I think. Like, it's a wobbly sense of self-trust at is what I feel at the heart of it. Is like, I have that self-doubt that is basically the opposite of self-trust. And when, like how you're talking about, like when you have an intuitive knowing, like when I was small, I would have intuitive knowings and my mom would be like, no, that's wrong. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's not a thing. Like, no, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Like that, what, no, you're being too sensitive. Just let it roll off your
Mm-hmm.
back. He didn't mean it that way. Just don't worry about it. I'm like, I have this emotional energy, and like that doesn't make it go away. So I don't know what you want me to do about it. So like, yeah, I mean, I, through those kinds of messages, like, just learn how to stuff that intuition. And only now am I like getting it back out of the box and like really like trying to figure out, okay, wait, how do I use my intuition?
Yeah.
How do I know when to trust myself? Like, it's a practice. It's a, yeah, like, And just a practice of leaning into what you can feel, like what feels right to you in this moment. And how can you show up from that place as good as you can? And then see what happens. See how you feel afterwards. See what happens like a couple weeks down the road, couple months down the road. Like observe, be curious, like you're saying, like, yeah. And learn when, oh, I felt like my intuition, but maybe it was still my fear or my woundedness that actually drove that particular behavior. So that's good to know. Next time I feel that, I'll at least have that observation to like factor into how I'm going to choose to respond to it. Maybe I give it a little extra time, because last time I played out this energy, I was pretty sure it was my fear. So maybe I just sit with it a little longer and see if that's really what's going on here. So, you know, not life changing, but a little bit longer pause, because yeah, we at least tried. We at least tried to trust ourselves and follow what it is that we thought we needed to do. And yeah, sometimes we express anger, and the takeaway is you knew way before it turned into anger that this isn't right.
Yeah.
There's something funky going on here. They got something under the surface that, like, if we would just get it out on the table, maybe everyone would be better off. So how about I just like say the thing that I'm feeling and acknowledge that it's mine and see where that goes? Because I wonder how it would be received if you did, you know, speak on it from the first inkling of sensing what was going on, versus waiting until the only option is to get mad and make it stop because it is so emotionally uncomfortable.
But then sometimes it ends up being a little bit, sometimes it ends up being destructive to ourselves, having held on to it for that long, which in turn feeds into the why that sometimes it becomes so catastrophic when we do respond, is because then you start to think about, you've made yourself wait this long, and how, you know, somebody's done something to you and you really should have said or something, and then you get that inner criticism of, why didn't you stand up and say something? You're so weak, you know, you're so, you know, you start criticizing and judging yourself, and then when you finally do say something on a situation that probably didn't require you to be as emotional about it, but it's only because you've had all this stuff that you've told yourself, you know, during the time before this other instance happens where it makes you blow up, you know?
Yeah. Like you're almost mad at yourself for making yourself sit through it the whole time, when you knew, like, this isn't good. I don't like this. And you let yourself take on the extra damage that you could have prevented by like saying it out loud in the moment. And it is so interesting how, like, another piece of this that I'm trying to heal in myself is recovering people pleaser, like maintaining a top value of keeping the peace and harmony between people. And I'm trying to transition myself into, no, I want whatever's for the highest good of people. Like, and sometimes conflict is what is for the highest good. Like that would really be the best outcome for everybody, is if we brought this thing that is under the surface to the surface, where we could have an honest, direct conversation about it. And I'm wanting to be so fearlessly committed to what is for the highest good of all, that like when I trigger people with what I say, I own it, you know? Like I'm trusting my heart. I'm trying my best to trust my heart. And if I'm feeling moved to say something, like if there is something present in the energy that's asking to be named, then I will name it. And if there are people who are uncomfortable with that, that's an initiation in their journey, you know, like, and you know that. I mean, you know all about initiations in people's journeys. I would love to do what you do, like to just get to like even shadow you for one day of sitting with people through ceremony. What? Yeah, I know we're really late in the conversation, so if you want to save that for another time, we totally can. But yeah, I'll bet it's wild.
Yeah, it's you know, seeing what they're showing up with when they first get there and they start talking about some of the things that they're dealing with, and then, you know, going into the medicine and like seeing how they show up in the medicine, and then the transformation that they get when it's afterwards. You know, it's crazy. Sometimes you could be spot on as far as, you know, seeing what that person might be challenged with in the medicine, and sometimes it, you know, it's something else. You know, it's just like I said, there's a lot of things that people are really dealing with, and it's the trigger in terms of how they're responding to their lives, and to be taken into a space where they get to strip some of that stuff, you know, away and see themselves from a totally different perspective. It's really amazing. Yeah, really amazing.
Yeah, kind of the best of all human emotions, like all in one go. Like
Mm-hmm.
all the darkness and all the light, is it all like co-present in that space where, I mean, it's just like emotionally naked, like how the
Yeah.
medicine takes away your defenses kind of thing.
Yep, that's exactly what happens. And even if you try to resist, it compounds the situation even more so with the that because even in that space, sometimes the ego is still trying to protect that which you need to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that former way of being, the ego is still trying to protect it because that's what it's known, you know, all this time. And what it's known to be aware of and sensitive to is now being shattered, you know. So of course you're going to have some of the very intense emotional responses that you have when you're under the medicine, because now you're being shown something that's contradictory to the way that you thought that things were supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, I've never done ayahuasca. It's on my list in my near future, hopefully. I'm still very much in the emotional preparation stage because
Yeah.
I trust that. I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're going to strip away your defenses and you have to feel whatever it is, like by the time you're aware of what you've been bottling, I mean, it's too late to take it back. Like you're going to
Yeah.
be in the middle of it, kind of thing. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
trying to let it kind of come out in its own time in maybe a more gentle way, but still like giving myself that space without like using the medicine to force myself into like a full blown state of nakedness, which is coming definitely. But even in like other psychedelic experiences, which is ayahuasca considered a psychedelic? Is that right?
Yeah.
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 Okay. So yeah, in other psychedelic experiences, like I essentially came out a different person, and it wasn't as strong as what ayahuasca is. And it's the same though, as far as like a deconstruction of the old self and emerging as the new self. And depending on who you are and how your energy is normally wired, like either that's more difficult or something you do all the time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I really took to the change. I was really excited about how everything was love and I'm love. And that's really all that exists is love. And that felt really nice. That felt like a relief. And I don't know, my life just kind of like opened up in a way after that. So I'm personally very curious at what my first ayahuasca ceremony would bring up. You know, I know just even off the full moon last night, like that brought up so much little fragments of things from my childhood that are still in there. So I know there's plenty
Yeah.
left. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I take it very seriously, but I'm extremely interested to explore that space at some point when the time is right.
Yeah. And then too, sometimes like your first experience may not even be necessarily one that would even trigger you in that way too sometimes, because that's another thing, that it's an ordeal medicine. And so yeah, you're gonna have some stuff that may be uncomfortable, but sometimes the experience may be just giving you a better understanding of what love looks like for
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
So it's not all painful, not all per se traumatic. It really just depends on what you're showing up with. It's really the the thing, what your intentions are when you're, with the medicine is really what's gonna show forward as well.
What kinds of intentions do you use, or like a range that you've seen people use? Like why do people show up wanting this experience?
Well, that one in particular, love, because they've never really had self-love. They haven't really like received it from, anybody in a healthy way. So, but they're going in to kind of clear all that up. You know, something that may happen for us relationship wise, they got a bunch of relationships they've been in that are toxic. They want to know why they keep attracting these things. You know, uh, they go in with an intention to get a clear understanding of themselves and how they're showing up, so that they can, actually make those changes so that they're not in that situation anymore. Now, one thing to note too is that per se it's not the actual medicine that's actually creating the traumatic experience. It's you yourself, because the medicine, all it's doing is bringing to your awareness what's already in you, you know. And that's the thing that I have to stress the point of, is because you can drink that in any other setting and you probably wouldn't get the same results, because the intention itself was not for the aspect of healing, of, going inward and peering into the depths of who you are and how you've been showing up and how to make those adjustments so that you can be a better person. It's it's just in itself. I use the word facilitator too. It's like a facilitator of change
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your perspective and in your life.
Have you ever seen someone like fight the medicine? Like
Yeah,
they took it and then their body just like blocked the experience of it?
yeah, it happens oftentimes. Sometimes it's in those situations where if you go in with a different perspective of what you think is supposed to happen, and that thing doesn't happen, but something actually did happen, but it wasn't like that. That's a situation, where they felt like they didn't get what they needed to get, when you did, you just don't see it as showing up in that way,
Mm.
you know. And people who are having those traumatic situations, usually it's them resisting some truth that's coming up, resisting something that's coming up that needs to be seen about themselves, and about some aspect of their relating, that they're unwilling to, it's like you get so accustomed to having the blinders on in life And when you finally had them things yanked off, it's uncomfortable because now you know, there's all these other things that you didn't see that now you're being, you know, exposed to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it can be traumatic sometimes.
Because, like, would you say that, we build our psychological defenses in
Yep.
response to whatever trauma we lived through, and really, like, conditioning itself is kind of traumatic. So basically, everybody has trauma. And then
Yeah.
when you go into the medicine, it basically like takes it, like, I don't know, like in my other experience, it was like the part of the brain that does the defending against like whatever is coming up naturally. It's like that part got put to sleep, and
Disabled.
the full brain was then just like receiving whatever came through. There was no defense, there was no blinders, it was just like a wide open stream of energy that you no longer have eyelids. Like, you have to look at everything. Like, you close your eyes and it's even worse. Like, you're
Yeah.
seeing it on the white wall, you're seeing it in the back of your eyelids. Like, you cannot make it stop. There's no psychological
Yeah.
defense.
As I told my friend one time, I said, you can't unsee what you've seen.
Yeah. Well, and you can't shut your eyes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you technically can, but it doesn't turn it off. Like,
Yeah.
once you're in there, you're in there. You're going to look at it. And yeah, that's where I'm like, I know it only amplifies like what you bring in. And that's where like my history of emotional repression, I do still wonder like what all is still in there. I know there's still stuff in there that I've repressed. So
Yeah.
but would I need to come to it then with an intention around like, I want to see the depth of my own repressed emotions. Like,
Yeah.
show me
That's
everything,
beautiful.
clean it
That's
out,
beautiful.
and let's just be done with it. Like, that is
Yeah.
what I'm feeling, like, to use it in that way and to fully expect that like it's like the darkest night of my soul.
Yeah.
Just all in one go though. Let's just face it and move on.
Get it out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I feel like whenever I do the medicines, you know, sometimes I might be feeling something cropping up. And it's like, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and use the medicine to kind of go in there and really get to the core of why I'm having this feeling, you know, so that it's no longer this thing that keeps operating in the background of my conscious, you know, or of my subconscious mind. You know, I can bring it up, deal with it, and then create a different path
Yes.
for it.
Which integration, like, right? Like, just, I don't want these pieces hanging out in the basement of my soul. Like, I want them coming up and being part of, what do you need to tell me? What am I supposed to get out of this? Like that message that came through last time that I shared about, if you experienced that kind of awful pain, it wouldn't be for nothing. That like when life hurts us, it's for something. So if there's like deep pains that we've repressed, like eventually we intended to sort that out. And
Yeah.
at this point, I feel like I've spent the last couple months like being willing and open to my subconscious in a way that says like, show me what I need to see, show me what I'm ready to see. And definitely a lot has been coming up. And so I'm working through it, knowing that like, okay, great, like that, those pieces will have been processed when I finally do get to this like unearthing super purge that's coming in the future at some point. Another thing that somebody told me was that like you can ask the spirit of ayahuasca to come to you, and that you can like work with the spirit, the grandmother spirit, I think they said.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Of like, you can set these same kinds of intentions. And so that's actually what I did, was like, Grandmother Ayahuasca, please come to me and help me to re-engage with the pieces of myself that I've left scattered about. Like, help bring them to me, help me put them back together. And
Yeah.
and then just kind of leave it and let whatever happens. And what happens is I get triggered over and over and over, like the pieces they show themselves, you know, and then you get to put them back together.
You know, you have the will to do it at that point. You know, once you've seen it, you kind of know what you're working with. At that point, it's no longer like working in the background without you actually being able to do something about it. You're being made aware of it.
Yeah. Either we work on our stuff or our stuff works on us.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Take your pick. Which would you like? Yeah. I feel like that's a nice place to wrap it up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that felt nice.
On this on this go round, I'm sure we'll have some reflections.
Oh yeah, always. Always. I mean, it seems like these conversations that I get into just take everything that's present in my consciousness and like weave it together with like what's going on in your consciousness, which is so parallel. And it is such a helpful reflection in the moment. And then the self-reflection that happens after is usually quite productive, like putting it together. Yeah, seeing it all from a different angle and all of that. So I thank you so much for meeting and chatting and co-creating this experience for the two of us and anybody else who might take this in at any point, I'm sure in the perfect time in their experience. There was a lot of good stuff in here, like a lot. So yeah, a lot to marinate on for myself, as these were very much like my own kind of leading edge energy type conversation of like, what am I trying to bring my awareness to? But also just, yeah, lots of good reminders and affirmations around like building those new patterns and showing up in the way of what we want and feeding energy into what we are actively choosing, bringing our conscious voice and flowing our attention and our energy in a conscious way.